Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Just Two Dads with my co-host, Shawn Francis. I am Brian Altunian, and today we're going to be talking about legacy and what does it mean to you to leave something behind when we go. Here today on Just Two Dads will be a fun and engaging conversation. Welcome back, folks. I'm Brian Altunian here with Shawn Francis, and we'll welcome everybody who's catching us on Facebook Live or after the fact on our YouTube channel. We are Just Two Dads, and on podcasts, past podcast outlets everywhere, and WSTX AM radio. And for those of us catching us on our new Roku channel under the Empowered Media Communications channel. Welcome. Please, if you're engaging with us live, put some comments in the comment section. We're happy to have a conversation with you. Today, we're going to be talking about what it means to have a legacy and what does that even look like. And so some of this came out of the conversation that Shawn and I were having about some of our more recent passings of well-known celebrities. Hello, Joe. Daughter Joe is signing in and saying hello. We've lost in the past couple of weeks some real great legendary folks such as Sidney Poitier and Betty White, and most recently Bob Saget. There are others that are in our midst. Those are some of the more recent that come to mind as they impact and have affected both Shawn and I personally, and I'm sure some of you as well. So we're going to talk about them here on Just Two Dads. Before we jump into that, though, I know, Shawn, hopefully we're not having technical difficulties, but it does happen on occasion. How you doing, buddy? You good? You all there? You with us?
I am good. How good I am depends on how I'm received. I think I was frozen there for a little bit, but I'll speak really fast so that I don't get
good.
Stuck. No, just kidding.
Good. Yeah.
No, I'm doing great and thankful to be able to be here and just have the discussion that we're having. And it came about, it's sort of a layered topics, if you will. Some of the promotion around this episode we'll talk about, we'll show what does it mean to be kind? What does legacy mean to you? Because all those things are connected. And then, where it came about is, as Brian mentioned in the opening, there's a handful of celebrities that, passed away within the last, this month, or the earlier part of this month. And I happened to see a post from Sidney Poitier's daughter, whose name is also Sidney. And what she stated was, how tragic it is adjusting to life without him. But she mentioned that as good a person as he was known to be, that most people have no idea just how good he really was, the goodness that came from him. And it made me stop and think. And reading that, I had a realization, and I'm gonna answer a question that I usually ask at the end of the show, which is, our ability to change the world is always based on our ability to change. Can you think of a belief that we may have had that we no longer hold on to? I've always believed that, being a kind person or a good person is not something you should have to work at. As a matter of fact, my thought has been that if you have to really work at it, maybe you're not that good or that kind of person. If it's a challenge for you, it's something that you can never be too good at. And I find myself in a place where I'm really committed to I've always said being the best I can be, being a person of personal development. We talk about that, but you should never grow weary of the work of being not just a kind person, but the kindest person you could possibly be. And when we talk about legacy, how would you like to be remembered? Well, you can hope to be remembered a certain way, or you can make it your business to just be as good as you possibly can and rise above, so that people will remember you in the manner that you want to, wish, and hope. And how challenging is doing that when you're raising or caring for a loved one or a child with special needs? These are just real conversations.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think raising any child, right? You want your children to be proud of you. The overlap with special needs families. That's, I think it's reflected here because, parents of special needs children are always thinking about, like, how is my child going to be taken care of? What does my child need? What do they need to be successful, independent, on their own without me or without my support, while I'm living or after I pass away? And, what does that say? I was just having a conversation with our good friend Susanna Peace Lavelle, who's a good friend of our show and has been on our as a guest on many occasions. And we were talking about, it's interesting because I find her to be a really good soul, and because she's known as that, a lot of folks, seek her out when they're in need, and she's a mom of and almost a single mom, primary caregiver for a 15-year-old daughter. I could stop right there, and parents of 15-year-old daughters know the handful that comes with, but then a daughter on the autism spectrum as well. And so the amount of effort that it takes for her to be able to just go through that as a single mom, but then have people reach out when they're in need it's a constant give. And so anyways, I think that can be challenged. The thing about her, and I think about special needs parents, is by the very nature of the work that we do with our own kids, we end up being much more empathetic, much more supportive, much more understanding, much more tolerant of the things around us, because we deal with things with our children sometimes that are outside the norm of standard behavior, if you will, or regular behavior, or neurotypical behavior for our kids. And so, we have that challenge. But again, let's talk about, if we can, Sean.
But I was just going to say it's worth discussing, because since that's what we are about, meaning you and I, as is Susanna and most of the people in our circle, a lot of the groups that I belong to on social media, that I've seen, some people, usually because of, their history, their upbringing, and maybe the diagnosis or challenge that they have as a parent, are not always necessarily the nicest people. And some may even tell you that that's their reason for not being that. So that's the other thing that made me think of the conversation in terms of the work. In other words, it is okay to work at being. You should never arrive at a place where you feel that you're as good a person or as nice as a person as you need to be. If that makes sense. Just as I feel that I can never get to a point in life where I have enough friends, or I have too many friends, or I know too many good people. One should never arrive at the conclusion that they're as good as they need to be. It should always be something that we're working on. And for some people, based on their experience and experiences, that's more of a challenge.
Yeah, I get it, because at some point there's a balance between being a good person and being somebody who's taken advantage of because of their niceness, right? So I think in essence that's what you're talking about when it comes to experiences. What do people experience? Are they, do they get to the point where, like, man, I'm just too nice? People just feel like they can walk all over me, or I'm just too nice, and I don't get it back. Maybe I should stop being so nice all the time because it doesn't come. People go through those, Matt, usually based on some sort of experience that they have. But so anyways, I agree with you. If you're working hard to be nice, then you should look at that and go, why is it a challenge? Why is it like a hike up the hill for me to be a nice person? And talking about nice people, for those of you who don't know, welcome back, bud. For those of you who don't know, I spent a couple of years doing stand-up comedy locally here in LA. This is something that I always wanted to do when I was a kid, and I did it for a couple of years, and had a real appreciation for folks who did stand-up comedy as their career. And I became a connoisseur, if you will, or a real fan. I knew a lot of early comedians in their early stages before they were breakout stars in other forums. And when I saw Bob Saget in the early days of his career, and for those of you who don't know, his stand-up comedy routine is a little blue. It's actually not as clean cut as his Full House persona, Danny Tanner, right? Or it's not as clean cut as the America's Funniest Home Videos host. It was pretty dark and hilarious, frankly. And so I have a real appreciation for who he was and as an actor. By the way, his work on Curb Your Enthusiasm, another example of where he's just being real and again, kind of dark and no BS kind of a guy. But in his passing, which was sudden, he was actually on tour doing a stand-up tour at the age of 65. What I've been so blown away by is everybody's response. And I mean, to the person, whether they worked with him, if they were in production, people who worked on the show, or they were, people who he met in the comedy circles, or, people who have interviewed him, people who have spent any time with him, how not just decent, but how kind he was, how giving he was, how much he cared about people. There was a great interview with him and John Stamos just after Don Rickles passed away on the Jimmy Kimmel show. I recommend you go see that if you haven't seen that. And they were talking about how much of a fan he was in the early days, Bob Saget's early days of comedy, and the comedy icon of Don Rickles. But they did dinners together, and they spent time together, and it was almost like Don Rickles had adopted him as another child, and it was the expression of kindness that was talked about over and over and over again, and the fact that he just committed so much of his time, effort, and energy to doing good things for people, just to doing nice things for people. What a great legacy to leave behind. While those who may know him as, again, as Danny Tanner, or know him from his television or Curb Your Enthusiasm, even more recently his Curb Your Enthusiasm days, don't really know the work that he put into contributing to the world around him. And I think that that's just such an amazing legacy to witness. I know you're unfrozen, so I'll stop talking here for a second. And
no, that's second. No, you keep going. I agree with that. And again, this is all, I'm still processing the notion, because when I tell you, like, I've had a different thought. I used to believe that the best things that we do don't take work.
Right.
But you just can't be. You can't ever be too conscious, especially when you stop and think, like, okay, how many ways can I be nice? Like we talked about before, you go to a drive-through. As a matter of fact, I thought of this the other day. I was listening to a local radio station, and there was a guy on the show. One of the producers of the show said that he went to Costco. I guess at one point at Costco, you didn't need to have a membership to buy food at the food court. I've never known that.
That's right. That's right. You never did. You could go right up. It was in the parking lot, and go and buy a piece of pizza for $1.25 or something like that.
And now you do, in fact, have to have a membership. And he didn't know that. So he gets in line. And as you know, Costco has great value for its pizza. The whole pizza is $10. He gets in line, then he finds out you have to have a membership. And he's like, oh, and why he doesn't have one, I don't know. That's a whole nother story. But then he said, he went to a couple that was in line behind him and just says, hey, would you mind using your membership to pay for my pizza? I'll give you $20, meaning he's going to pay them $10 to buy a $10 pizza. And their response was, no. And he was like kind of taken aback. And then it leads me back into our mission to help families and build a bridge between the life they have and the one that they want through financial services and everything. And so, because a lot of my posts lately have been based upon just really coming to a high level of realization that no matter how dedicated you are to being kind, whether you're in the business of kindness or being kind from just a human standpoint, there are people that won't receive what you have to give. So he asked them again just to try and get a grip on it. And they just told him, no. And they just said, no. And somebody like 2 lines over saw and said, you know what? I'll buy the pizza for you. It doesn't. And he was like, wait a minute. And so it just, again, it goes to show, again, I've said before, whether you believe in him as and I hope I'm not going too off topic here or off on a tangent, but whether you believe in him as a prophet, a product of divine intervention, or whatever have you, no matter what your religious thought is, everybody agrees. Even if you have a dispute as to his racial background, everybody agrees that Jesus Christ was someone that had the best intentions, right? And despite his intentions, they were questioned to the point of his death. So if he, with the most noble of intentions, has them questioned, we should expect that there are people that just aren't going to receive your kindness. And you have to separate a lack of reception of that kindness from your desire to just simply do good, because human beings are weird. That's going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, we mentioned this guy on the program before, but of course, remember him, and I'm forgetting his first name. I think it's Josh Shapiro is how you say his last name. This is a guy who posts things on social media where a delivery person brings something to his door and he just starts handing them a bunch of cash. It's like,
right,
you deserve to be treated. And he posted something the other day where he walked into a laundromat and he's like, I'm short a few quarters. Do you have a few quarters? And if you're doing laundry and you've got quarters, either you have extra, you may not, right? But you're never not kind. And this woman was like, oh yeah, sure, here you go. He's like, thank you for doing that. That's amazing. Here's $100. And she was like, what's that for? He's like, just because it's an appreciation of your kindness. And it's almost like it's so sad that you have to give, a gift of significance to acknowledge somebody's kindness, because there's such a lack of
conditioned. Yeah, it's funny. You know what it is? It's like, I was looking at a podcast the other day, an interview, and somebody was talking about how we're conditioned to settle, which is why people, put limitations on themselves and everything like that. And that's just in terms of, peak performance and being the best you can be. I understand, caution in terms of like, is there something kind of, is there a catch here or whatever have you? Ask the question to make sure. But as you just explained it, and yes, $100 is kind of like, wait a minute, you just gave me some quarters. You're giving me $100. But if you have it to give, that's the other thing you have to expect. You got to accept that people aren't going to do that. And it's funny. We're programmed to question certain amounts and certain types of kindness. There's another video. I don't even know who it is. This guy does these different posts from different parts of the world where he'll, just walk up to people. And each one that I've seen, I think he's like in another country or in the Caribbean or something like that. And he'll say to someone, hey, it's my birthday today. And I'm looking for somebody to go parasailing with me. I've never done it before. Would you want to go? And people you could see them wrestling. They're like looking around. They're like, me? Like, now? I'd love to. And then the person that takes them up on it, they go and they have their time of their life. And granted, it's a little daredevilish, but the whole idea of let me just share. That's why when they talk about dance, like no one is looking, like nobody cares. You really have to just like let go of that. And it goes back to that which I say all the time, which is, again, we should be, more childlike and less childish, because you don't care who's looking.
Yeah, right. And again, I think some of the challenges that you do hear horror stories on the other side where somebody's trusting and then somebody takes advantage of that trust. But in general, where it's nice to see. There's a guy on social media who's been doing this for quite some time. He goes by Charlie. He's at Charlie on TikTok and I think on Instagram as well. I know Charlie raised over $1 million. I have a friend who had a really successful business transaction last year, and so he's big on giving to charitable causes. And I know that he and his firms gave about $30,000 to this, to Charlie, $1 million. And Charlie set out to go help families who were hit by the recent tornado in Kentucky. And so Charlie's been posting videos where, like, he talked to a gal, the one I saw the other day, where, her dreams were to open up her own salon, her hair cutting salon, not necessarily a salon for women. It's for all genders. And so, she took him to it. It was completely devastated and blown out by the tornado. And he said, can you cut my hair right now? And she said, yeah, I can absolutely grab my clippers, like not even thinking about it. Right. Like, she shows him around. He shows an interest in her, just sharing her, her devastated, looked like a beautiful barbershop, and grabs a, chair and starts cutting his hair. Does a good job. He said, how much would you normally charge for this? And she's like, I don't know, 25 to 30. That's what she said. He's like, okay, cool. Well, here's my 30. And he hands her $30,000 to rebuild her barbershop. And, and she's like, you're joking, right? Like that I'm being punked kind of thing, right? Because that's our first initial reaction. Like, this isn't real, because this, first of all, we all think, well, this doesn't happen. Second, we think this definitely doesn't happen to me. If it happens to other people, it may be, but it doesn't happen to me. And then it's like, why are you doing this? And who are you? And what's this all about? But all that happens in a nanosecond for this gal. And she just, bursts out into tears and, gives him this extended hug. And he's like, you deserve this. Like, you deserve to be treated with kindness and be given a break. You don't want your dreams to die because of, something that was completely out of control. But more importantly, you're a kind person. I just asked you to cut my hair and you didn't even think twice. Your shop has been devastated and you didn't think twice about giving me a haircut. Like,
yeah.
That's extraordinary in and of itself. And I think that people forget in our busy day-to-day lives that there are certain simple gestures that we can do, especially if it's our nature, but that we can do that just shows kindness. Hold the door open for somebody, hold the elevator for somebody, help somebody carry a heavy box into the, into the lobby, something of kind, some element of kindness. And it does go, it does have a multiplicative effect. It does make a difference.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think the other thing that I've come to realize too, and this has to do with your own, I don't know, I guess your own security, is that if I offer something like that and someone's a little resistant, I would almost, if I don't, not necessarily take it personally, but be disappointed that took place. As you know, there are a handful of people in our firm where what we would do is we would go down to Skid Row in LA on Christmas morning and give out both food and, items and clothing and things of that sort. And I remember when you're doing that, and a girl that, came up to us, and she was obviously homeless, and she was just like, we had a bag full of like bagels. I mean, like trash bag size, just a bunch of them, and clothing and all kinds of different things. And her response was, no, I don't do bread, and then there was, she literally said that. Okay. And there was another guy, with different things we were giving out, we had toothbrushes and toothpaste and underwear and stuff like that we were giving out, from one of the trucks that we had. And there was a guy that was looking at the items and he was like, junk. And I remember almost being like, how dare you? But again, this is another belief. Not only do I believe that you should work at it, but you have to separate yourself completely from somebody's response. Because if you realize that you're doing it for yourself as much as you are for them, just because it feels good to give, don't let any inadequacies or anything like that you have within yourself be so big that you get attached to an outcome that is anything less than, appreciation, because not everybody is going to appreciate that. I think that's one of the reasons why I've always liked the show Undercover Boss. And I guess there's a celebrity version. I saw one the other day with Deion Sanders, and he's a guy it's proved over time that there's more to him than the whole prime time image that he had when he played in the NFL. And there was something about, maybe it's because it's such a contrast to his image, the people that he sat down with that he helped in the end after going undercover in disguise or whatever. It was just really, really, it wasn't just touching. I think I've reached a new point where I know that those are the things that I want to be able to do. I want to, again, be as kind and as good a person as you possibly can, lift people's burdens and empower them. But I'm also conscious of being that person as much as I can at home too, because that's what, that's where that all of that starts. And then it goes back to the challenge with that as a parent to a child with special needs too.
Yeah. I just wanted to go back to the thing that you started, that you said about, about not being attached to the outcome. The reality is it's not that somebody may not appreciate it. It's their expression of appreciation may not match what your expectation is of their expression of appreciation. You come down and give it. By the way, we don't know the mental state of that guy that's like junk. He could be in a way, what you've given him is the opportunity to have a little bit of control over his particular situation, to be able to say those kinds of things. I don't need this. I don't need that, justifying it. Like, we don't know what his mental state is. That's the reality is like if we want somebody to go, oh gosh, thank you for this. I really need this. Thank you. That's one form of an expression of appreciation. But the reality is him just being able to sit there and go, don't need it, don't need it, don't need it, don't need it, or junk, whatever he called it.
Yeah.
That could be just as valuable for him and his mental state as somebody
to have to give someone choice. Absolutely right. Because
100%.
when there's a choice and control is taken away, that's something else too. And then the other thing is when you're removed from, when you're disappointed, it's kind of like about you and you don't even realize that.
Because if we're disappointed, it is about us because it doesn't match what we think. It's already about us.
And when you're consciously not going, gosh, I went out of my way and that person didn't even really appreciate it. If you're not saying that, sometimes it's tough to catch that you've made it about you.
Right.
Yeah. And at least that's an indication.
Again, there's a difference between being attached and being committed. Being attached to an outcome and committed to the act, right? So you could be committed. I'm going to give this, and whether they accept it or not. By the way, I think honest communication, delivered in a respectful way, generally should, I hate using the word should, but should come with that same level of lack of attachment and commitment to the delivery, right? So I'm committed to tell you this, and I'm not going to be attached to how you respond to it, because how you respond to it is your experience and my taking in of your response is mine, right? So that's all made up stuff in our heads anyway. So if you're like, I'm just committed to delivering an honest communication, delivered with respect, then again, is it the same kind of thing? The giving of any kind of gift, verbal or otherwise, is something that we all ought to be looking at, especially these days when there's so much divisiveness. It falls in line with that empathy and love that we talk about. But going back to the folks that we'll talk about Betty White, and then I want you to talk about Sidney Poitier. But the thing about Betty White, I read a meme yesterday that was just so amazing. Her 100th birthday would have been just this past Monday. We're in January of 2022, and the meme said, "How amazing that you've lived 99 years and the world thinks it wasn't enough. Like, you lived 99 years and everybody is disappointed that you didn't get to 100. Like, we all wanted you to live longer." First of all, what an amazing testament.
And surprised too.
For sure. And then the outpouring of love because she was such a supporter of animal rights and, animal safety and, animal kindness. I think they said that there was, on her birthday, a record number of donations given to animal clinics and animal support facilities. And, again, an acknowledgement of her kindness, not just to the people that had the, good fortune of working with her, or working beside her and working in support of her, but also for those animals and the people who care for those animals too. What a tremendous legacy to leave behind, that somebody adopted a pet and gave them a loving home because of work that you had done, that you never met, you never spoke to, you had no interaction with them, but they took an action based on who you were being in the world and made the difference in somebody else's life. In this case, it may be a pet, but it could be another person. And that's why we've talked about this theme before, the idea of, giving of yourself in such a way that it inspires somebody else to take an action just based on who you are. You don't have to say, "Hey, Brian, you're such a great person. You want to think about like no interaction at all, but I would get inspired by you, who you are in the world, and make me want to be a better person, or make me want to take an action that provides love and kindness to somebody else." That's
absolutely
that's a legacy to be proud of, right?
Yeah.
That's a legacy to be proud of.
And it goes back to the fact that there are more people watching what we do, especially now with social media, than we realize. And that's why we say that, there are people that are dependent upon your success and need to see you succeed that you don't even know and haven't even met. And then when we talk about, and really that's the first sign of success anyway, which is the manner in which you serve other people.
Right.
Yeah,
for sure. We talk about Jeff Levitan, one of our, personal mentors, our business partner and colleague. We had him as a guest on our podcast last year, talking about his All for One Foundation, and his. Thank you, Joe. That's very sweet. Jill. Thank you. I think we all, I'm going to throw it here on the screen. When she says you, I think she means this podcast and our stories and individually.
Brian's referring to the comments in the chat for those that are listening after the fact and have no idea what he's referring to.
Right.
Yeah.
My daughter Jo posted in our comments, "You inspire me," is what she said, which is very sweet. Love you. That's beautiful. Oh, she's like, "You, Dad, you." That's okay. Thank you, babe. That's awesome. But going back to Jeff Levitan, Jeff Levitan does an entire class on living life on purpose, and we've had a conversation about that here on this podcast. And in fact, that living life on purpose seminar, he is if it's not up online now, it will be available for if you give a $25 donation to his All for One charity. You can take that class. It's about a 3 to 4 hour class on being committed to basically building a legacy. The funny thing about it is that his entire business is around the word legacy. And he always says, like some of us, we talk about doing our business plan and like, what are we going to do this month? And what are we going to do this year? What are we going to do the next 5 years and the next 10 years? Jeff starts at the end, which is part of today's conversation. Anyways, he starts at the end with write your own eulogy, meaning at your funeral, what are people going to say about you? Right. And that's talking specifically about legacy. And then if you did that first, and then you live up into that ideal, right? Can you live your life to, we see, if you guys all remember the movie Saving Private Ryan, where, Private Ryan, played by Matt Damon, at the end of, near the end of his life, as his old age, he turns to his wife and he says, did I earn it? Did I earn the sacrifice that other people made for me to be here and to have lived my life? Did I earn their sacrifice? Have you earned? All of us are here because somebody sacrificed. Our parents sacrificed something. Our grandparents sacrificed something to give us the life that we have now. Have we earned that sacrifice? Have we earned what they did before us? And have we earned what somebody's going to say about us at the end of our lives? That's really kind of that is what the meaning of legacy is all about. And I think, we've seen with in that case with Bob Saget here and Betty White, some of the celebrities who have had, and only bring them up because there's just so much out there right now on social media about them and their legacies. And Sidney Poitier, again, another one. And, definitely want you to talk about some of the stuff that you were, that you were impacted by in that conversation, because that's just another life that was the commitment to something so much greater than himself, inspirational for so many people. So to go ahead and talk about that for a second.
Well, the one common thread there is that all of these people were very deliberate in terms of their actions, if not outright their legacy. Because if you think about it, when you think about how you're going to be remembered, there's that which you would like people to say or hope that they say. But if you kind of go about your way, sort of making sure that takes place, even if you just, I'll just be as good a person as I can possibly be, people will have good things to say about you. But if you write down with intention how you wish to be remembered and then start living the life that does that, then what happens is people have no choice but to remember you in the manner in which that you hope to be remembered. And then at that point, we're talking about, like, even when you ask someone, how would you hope to be remembered? In most cases, that question would be answered from the perspective of self. Like, how would I like to be remembered? He was a good guy. He was a good father. He did this, he did that. But if you think beyond yourself from a service standpoint, right, the manner in which you can serve people after you're gone, then you start thinking of those other answers are kind of what we refer to as lower law. The higher law reasons would be, how is it going to affect other people, including my children, my family members that aren't even born yet, other people that aren't even born yet? And don't assume that because you're not famous that stuff doesn't apply to you. Because one, everything gets changed by what we do individually first, then collectively. Number two, we're living in an age right now where everything we do is recorded anyway. So you have so much opportunity to impact people that aren't even here yet.
Yeah. No, it's true. And oftentimes we find stories about, our loved ones after their passing that we had no idea about. And I think that's the lesson, right? In fact, I think I remember we were just having this conversation. It was a day or a week or two ago, an episode ago, and Shawn Hall had put in there, or actually it may have been Abel. Somebody put in there like, give flowers while people are still alive, right? So, it's good to know the stories, while people are alive, so you can understand the legacy. I'm going to share that with you just for the moment. I'm just going to put up on the screen here the Jeff Levitan. There's a link to his Living Life on Purpose. A little bit about his, about his program and what it's all about. We don't get paid anything to promote. We love Jeff Levitan. We use Living Life on Purpose in our own business, in our own lives, and so, we're putting it up here really for people just to get a chance to go see a way to set your life in motion to do something of significance and of contribution. So it's jefflevitan.com/living-life-on-purpose.html. So jefflevitan.com, Living Life on Purpose. So thanks for putting that up. To our producer, Shawn Hall in Hawaii, who we love dearly. Thank you, buddy, for sharing that with us. And also, again, this concept, I saw this story. There's a gentleman whose father had passed away, and he had been separated from the family. That the son who was still alive and sharing the stories, separated from his family a bit and didn't really know a lot of the stories. So father had remarried and he had step siblings and whatnot. And as the whole family gathered to have a memorial for him, they were in a local town that he, where they all grew up when they were younger. And he was coming back to visit, and he relayed. So he's been relaying stories on social media lately. I will find his name about his. I always say these things. I'm like, oh, what's that guy's name again? But anyways, okay. He shared a story about his father. They were at a restaurant, and there were some of the younger kids, and this young waiter came up, and he said, hey, do you need me to do anything with the kids? Do you want me to bring them something? Like, he was very attentive to the kids. Obviously, the family was in sort of planning mode of what they were doing for the memorial and everything. But the fact that the waiter took extra time and effort to do something for the kids that were at the table, and it was unusual, right? Yeah, sadly, right. Unusual. And so he went up to the waiter afterwards and said, I got to, tell you, you're, such a nice young man like that. What a nice thing for you to do. That's a good gesture. And they talked a little bit, and he asked, what are you doing in town? Blah, blah, blah. I'm here for, my dad's funeral. And what are you doing? He said, well, oh no, he didn't ask him yet. He said, oh, I knew your father. And he said, what do you mean? He said, yeah, your dad was my baseball coach. And he taught me some lessons about being kind, about giving of yourself, about going the extra step. He goes, and he said, well, what are you doing now? He said, I'm home from college, and I've got a college scholarship for baseball. This guy's, he said, your dad basically coached me, and now I'm taking that forward, and now I'm 16. He's like, oh my God, that's amazing. He goes, wait a minute. The guy was realizing, wait a second, I knew, like, somehow he said, like, yeah, you're my dad's cousin. Your dad's my dad's cousin. And then the guy was like, wait a minute, did we grow up together? Like, I know your dad. And it was this whole thing about, they realized how close the families were actually tied. But the fact that he had taken the lessons about being kind, and it parlayed to make such a difference in his life. And he got into his college of his choice. He's playing baseball, and such a lovely story. And the whole revelation came out of the fact that it was one simple act of kindness. He came up and said, can I do something to help the kids? Can I get the kids kind of, taken care of while you're doing whatever important thing it is that you're doing? And so that's why I think, first of all, that act of kindness was being acknowledged immediately, but then his father's act of kindness that he learned about.
I've experienced that.
Was sharing, right?
I've experienced that firsthand, and you can cut me off if I'm repeating it, but I think I shared a story on one of the earlier episodes of the show where, when I was living in the Virgin Islands in the 80s, I went with my then girlfriend to the movie theater, and pay for the ticket.
Tell the story. It's a good story.
And as we go in, and we pay for the ticket, and then we and the ticket booth is like it's outside, so it's kind of old school. So you pay at the window, go into the theater itself, and we're at the concession stand. The girl comes out from the ticket booth and says, "Here, I'm giving you your money back. The manager says you're not supposed to pay." And she just like, that was it. That was his instruction, and she's not saying anything else. I'm like, who the heck's a manager, and what are you talking about? I just didn't, and I wasn't skeptical. It just didn't add up. And then he introduces himself, and he says, "My name is Elroy Tatum. I know exactly who you are." And I'm like, okay. And in the Virgin Islands, especially, St. Thomas, especially even being smaller than St. Croix, that's not too strange. Everybody kind of somewhat knows everybody, especially back then. But he's telling me, I know who you are. And he's telling me about how my grandparents took him in at a time when it was where he really, he needed that. And they helped him to some extent with, getting into or going to college and everything. And he says, if you ever need anything, you just, you let me know. And from that day forth, for that period that I was living down there, I think I was down there for like a year and a half. This is after high school. He would not let me pay to enter the theater under any circumstance. I had one other instance where, and at that point in time, I was living with my grandmother. I had one other instance where I came home and there was a gentleman in the living room with his wife having a conversation with my grandmother. It wasn't just the fact that he was white, but you can usually tell a tourist by their attire from a mile away, especially an older tourist. And he's sitting there in the living room talking with my grandmother, and he proceeds to tell me the story that when he visited St. Thomas in the 60s, my grandfather was the epitome of the skit on the old show In Living Color with a Caribbean family, where the dad was like, I was the cook, the dishwasher, the attorney, and 5 ting. That's who my grandparents were. So they had a Chrysler dealership, they had local transit as far as buses go, they had a restaurant, all of this stuff, and neither one of them finished high school. And this was a time when he was driving a taxi cab, and the gentleman says that their grandfather came to the hotel and picked him up at the lobby or whatever. They take off, and as they leave the hotel, he asked my grandfather, he goes, "Oh, I'm sorry, I need you to turn back around, go back to the hotel. I forgot my wallet." And my grandfather was like, "You don't need your wallet. You're with me." Took him around to every location that he wanted to go to for the day, paid for his meals and everything. And that man told me, and my grandfather passed away when I was about 3, so I have no memory of him at all whatsoever. And what he said, though, was, if you ever need anything in life, you just, let me know. And I just know that that's the kind of impact I want to have on people.
Yeah, I think that's exactly the point that we're making today. It's like that's the kind of impact that you want to have, you want to have on people. And by the way, it doesn't take much. It's empathy. It's having a care for, your fellow man. We saw the story about the snowstorm in Virginia, and Uber driver took a young teenage gal, helped her they were stuck, got a hotel room, called the parents to let them know where she was and that she was taken care of. He paid for the hotel room just because he didn't want her to be alone. She was scared as it was, and he took care of her, which, by the way, sadly enough, you hear stories that don't end so nicely when it comes to that kind of arrangement. But in this particular case, it was a genuinely, thoughtful thing to do, caring for. I think if you can, again, it's all empathy. If you could put yourself in the position of the parents where you have no idea if your daughter's going to make it home in a snowstorm, knowing that she was traveling on this road where all of these motorists were stranded for almost 24 hours. It's a frightening experience to think about your child being in that situation. And you would hope that you would find a good Samaritan who would take care of your child and, treat her decently and, do something for her. That's kind of what it's all about at the end of the day. How do we leave a legacy behind, and how can we be empathetic? And again, to your point, Shawn, if somebody's writing your eulogy, what do you want people to say? I will say this, one of the things that I'm very proud of, in our business, when I'm often introduced by somebody in the business who knows me, when they introduce me to a friend or family member of theirs, they talk about, what I've done in my past. but they always say he's an amazingly dedicated father. It's sort of like, I don't think I've done anything extraordinary to get that kind of reputation. I mean, clearly, we interact with one of my children here, my daughter Jordan, who's often a contributor, and she puts a lot of comments up on our show here. But I have two other children as well, and people who know me know that if my child calls, even if I'm in a business meeting, I take that phone call. If it's if it conflicts with a schedule, I literally think, how am I going to do this around my child's schedule? And I just put my children as a top priority for me. I just think that that's the right thing to do as a parent. I don't think I have that as a child as much necessarily, but I have that as a parent. And so the fact that I get acknowledged, people say that he's a dedicated father, to me, I think that's a sweet thing to say. I didn't really think I was doing anything to deserve it, but clearly that's the kind of stuff.
You're doing what you're supposed to do. Yeah.
You're doing what you're supposed to do. And I think if we all do the things that we're supposed to do, be kind to one another, that is what people will say about us at the end. And at the end of the day, is that what you want your legacy to be, known as a dedicated partner, spouse, child, brother, parent, business partner, all of those things?
Definitely.
A cherished and dedicated person across the board, right? Thank you, Shawn.
Yeah, and there's always, if anybody's listening and they're having challenges with this, because let's just be real. There's a lot of people that are hurting, generally speaking, and the state of the world is one thing. When you compound that with being a special needs parent, a parent to a child or loved one with special needs, that compounds it. There are a lot of people that are having health issues, a whole bunch of things. And for some people, because of what they're facing, they may feel like, look, I'm going to be as nice as I can be, but I got my own stuff to deal with right here and now. For anybody that's in that situation, think long-term and think about how you'd like to be remembered. And there's always some way in which you can deliver the most kindness that you can at that point in time. There's always room for it. The measure on what you give today might not be the same that you give when you're at a different place and time in life. So there's always room for it. And it's interesting. The same show I was talking about on the radio where I heard them, talking about his experience at Costco. There was somebody was talking about being in the line at, I think it was at Starbucks, and they were going to offer to pay for the order of the person behind them. And they were told, we've got this thing going. It's been like, I think 20 days or something like that, where someone's always paying for the next person, in line. And the person's order was like $75 or something like that. And the person's response was, I'm sorry, I'm not paying for that. And then they had callers call in and were asking, would you pay for it? Would you? And it's so funny. What I thought was overlooked was, who says you have to pay the $75?
Right.
Maybe what you contribute to it is $2 or something like that. And maybe it's tough to do because at that point the person's right behind you, or the person that had just left. Who knows what the logistics are? But the point is that there's always something that somebody can give. Whatever each person can give is not to be judged. It's about giving what you can. So by the same token, what is your legacy? What do you want it to be? What vision do you have? It's got to be you and your lane. Everybody's got a road to take and a level of contribution to make.
Yeah. I think, and I heard this in a program that I was involved in many, many years ago, the things that we appreciate in other people, or that we love about other people, or that we respect about other people, are actually the things about ourselves that we like. When we talk about, oh, so-and-so is, such a generous person, we're in a way acknowledging that our acts of generosity are something that we're proud of, without coming out directly saying, I'm proud of being a generous person, right? We acknowledge other people for the good works that they do. By the way, the things that we don't like about other people are elements of our own, personality that we may not like. Our tendency is to be, oh, that guy's really selfish. That's saying, like, I don't like when I'm selfish or if I'm acting selfishly,
Right.
it's out of integrity for me, and I don't really care for that. But the idea that those things that we do like about other people are truly those things that we like about ourselves. So I would say for people who are listening or anybody who's watching, if you start looking at what are those traits or characteristics that you see in other people that you really admire, write those things down and look at that list and see if you have not just described yourself and how you think other people would describe you in your eulogy, or out, if kind of out of earshot, or as they introduce you. Are they saying these things about you, right? Are they saying that and I would say that that's a good exercise for everybody. It is beginning of the year, and we're talking about it, is like, look at those things that you admire about other people, write them down, and then look and see how much that describes you. And by the way, vice versa, because you look at the things that you don't like about other people and go,
yep,
these are things that I could work on. These things I could
and
work
pay
on.
attention to what feeds you. If somebody gives you a compliment or some kind of acknowledgement about your appearance, at least for me, I accept that, especially on a day where, some days you head out the door, not much heading out the door these days as much as the past 2 years. But when you head out the door, you begin your day, you look in the mirror. Some days you feel better about the way you look than others. And especially on a day where you don't see anything remarkable and somebody comments about, how good you look, your outfit, or you're being handsome or pretty, or whatever the case might be, that feels good and you appreciate it. But it pales in comparison to what you get or feel when somebody says something that's complimentary about your character.
For sure.
Because that outlasts everything. It outlasts us. It's how we end up living forever.
For sure. Right. They say we die, right? We die twice: the day we die and the day people stop talking about us.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. And again, it's not about, well, I want to still be talked about. I want somebody to know I was here. Well, it's okay for people to know that you were here, especially if what you do here is to inspire other people to make the world a better place, because that's what everything's all about.
And your memory of those that we've lost, are honored. They are honored by the activities and the actions and the work that we do today. And so, you will be talked about, in essence, because your legacy will live on through the actions you've inspired in the world and around you, and in your family members and anybody else that you've impacted. I think about, how many people have said something like, oh, I'm so inspired as a young boy or as a young girl to see this. And then I decided this is what I wanted to do with my life. And I was inspired. Some people are like, oh, I didn't even know I was doing anything inspirational. I was just doing my thing. I was doing me. I was, being my own self. And, the fact that somebody got some value out of that, that's how you live on, and your legacy lives on. So
yeah,
we're getting close to the end of our hour as we clearly people know us a lot now. Shawn, if they've watched any episodes of Just Two Dads, they know that we can talk endlessly about these kinds of subjects, and we kind of have to stop ourselves, otherwise we will.
Yes.
So as we wrap up today's episode of Just Two Dads, I'm honored to be in this partnership with you as we go through this, because we get to talk about these kinds of things, and we get to get people to hopefully get people to think a little bit about ways to make the world a better place, one person at a time, or one action at a time, or one day at a time. Anything that we can do, it's all incremental, right? And we realize how kind of insignificant we are in the grand scheme of the total universe. And so, I've shared once before that somebody said that the meaning of life is enjoying the passage of time. And if during this passage of time we can make a difference in somebody else's life, then we've done something of significance. Yes, as Shawn Hall is putting up, what we do now echoes in eternity. Marcus Aurelius, if you can believe, that's going back a little ways. So what we do now echoes in eternity. It's exactly true. So let's be good people. Empathy and love, as I always end off. I like to do a hashtag empathy and love when I post stuff on social media. To me, that's always it's the constant theme that runs through the actions that I take, the work that I do, the conversations that I have. It's all about being empathetic to somebody else's situation and understanding what they're going through, maybe something different than what you've experienced, and looking at the world through the lenses of love. The world will be a better place. Thank you, Joe. That's a very sweet comment too. genuine conversation between two amazing dads share to the world these amazing topics is very sweet. Thank you, Joe. That's really our intent. And again, it makes me proud that my daughter sees it, acknowledges it, and knows that that's what I'm committed to. I don't want to say my work here is done, but that's what I want my children to think about me as they build their families and live their lives, and that will live on after I'm gone, right? I want that conversation. So thank you, Joe, for the acknowledgement. That means the world to me. I greatly appreciate that. Shawn.
Well, I want to thank everyone that tuned in near and far, whether you're listening to us on WSTX Radio or wherever podcasts can be found. I want to encourage you to follow us and subscribe on our YouTube channel, Just Two Dads. And at the same time, I also want to thank the women in my life without whom I could not be who I strive to be or who I am. And that would be, of course, my mom, Jan, and my amazing wife, Laura. And to everyone watching, we'll see you next week. We've got some big things in store for the coming year. But wherever you may be, if you're watching this, if you're hearing us, we love you.
Bye, everybody. See you again our next episode. Oh, yeah, this is where I'm supposed to do that thing, right, Shawn? Hey, everybody.
Yeah.
Catch us next week on